Had been 3 months since I escaped the suffocating control of the neighborhood HOA and retreated to my family's lake cabin, a weathered cedar structure tucked deep in the pines. The lake was glassy that morning, disturbed only by the occasional ripple from a fish breaking the surface. The old dock creaked gently in the breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. No absurd fines for a slightly faded mailbox, no threatening letters about the color of my shutters, no neighborhood busybodies peeking over my fence. But freedom always comes at a cost. The HOA board back in town hadn't taken kindly to me selling my house without their approval. They'd buried me in certified letters claiming unpaid administrative fees. And when I ignored them, they escalated to threats of legal action. I expected the harassment to stop once I moved out of their jurisdiction. I was wrong. That morning, the state attorney general himself was scheduled to visit the cabin, a man of quiet authority. He had taken an interest in my complaints after uncovering a string of similar cases. Homeowners bullied, extorted, and sometimes even forced into foreclosure over fabricated violations. He believed the HOA board in my old neighborhood was running something far shadier than routine rule enforcement. I spent the early hours organizing documents, stacks of letters, copies of phone records, and photos of violations they had invented just to levy fines. My kitchen table was covered in evidence. Outside, the sun rose over the lake, spilling gold across the cabin walls. I brewed coffee and tried to calm my nerves. If the Attorney General was taking this seriously, maybe the nightmare would finally end. Around 10 o'clock, a black SUV crunched up a gravel drive. The Attorney General stepped out, his press suit looking out of place against the rustic backdrop. He gave a curt nod and shook my hand firmly. We carried the documents inside, spreading them across the table as the smell of pine sap drifted in through the open windows. As I explained each piece of evidence, his expression grew more severe. He took careful notes, occasionally pausing to snap photos of the paperwork with his phone. "This isn't just overreach," he murmured, his voice low but deliberate. "This looks criminal." For a brief, shining moment, I felt a swell of hope. Maybe someone was finally going to hold these people accountable. Maybe the letters, the harassment, the constant feeling of being watched. Maybe it would all come to an end. But peace never lasts long when someone like Karen is involved. Karen, the HOA board president, was infamous back in the neighborhood. She was the type to measure your grass with a ruler, to circle your driveway with chalk to make sure no unauthorized cars parked overnight, to peek into your backyard under pretense of community safety checks. Everyone knew her name. Everyone feared her. And now, somehow, she found out exactly where I was. It started with the sound of tires on gravel. Not cautious, like the Attorney General's arrival, but aggressive, fast, throwing dust into the air. I frowned and glanced out the window. A shiny silver crossover skidded to a stop behind the black SUV, blocking it in. Before I could react, the cabin door swung open so hard it slammed against the wall. Karen stormed inside without knocking, without hesitation, her sunglasses perched on top of her head like a crown. She carried a thick folder under her arm and wore an expression of pure entitlement. The Attorney General froze, startled but composed. I stood, heart pounding, as Karen marched up to the table and slammed her folder down on top of my evidence. Papers fluttered to the floor. "This is private property," I said sharply, though she didn't seem to hear or care. Her eyes swept the room like a hawk scanning a field. She looked at me, then at the man in the suit. Recognition flashed across her face. Her smug expression faltered, just for a second, before returning with twice the venom. "I knew you were up to something," she hissed, her voice dripping with self-righteous fury. "You think you can run off to some dirty shack in the woods and scheme against the HOA? Not on my watch." The Attorney General calmly closed his notebook. His silence was almost louder than her rant. He didn't need to speak yet. He was simply observing, cataloging every word, every frantic gesture, every illegal step she was taking by barging into a private home uninvited. Karen didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. She yanked open her folder and began tossing papers onto the table. Threat letters, lien notices, cease and desist demands, all with my name on them. "You owe us," she barked. "You owe big. And if you think hiding out here is going to save you, you're dead wrong. We can take this place too. Her words cut through the cabin air like a chainsaw through old timber. My stomach knotted. I wanted to shout, to throw her out, to slam the door behind her, but something told me to stay calm. The Attorney General's pen was moving again. Karen was so consumed with her own rage that she didn't notice the small badge glinting from the man's breast pocket, nor the calm authority in his eyes as he finally rose from his chair. She didn't notice that every word she spoke was making her case worse. Outside, the wind picked up. Pine branches scraped against the window pane as if warning that a storm was coming, and not just the kind that brings rain. By the time Karen finished her tirade, the kitchen table was a mess of papers, both hers and mine. She planted her hands on the edge, leaning forward as if to stare me down. The Attorney General cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it cut through the chaos like a gavel strike. Karen turned to him with a sneer, clearly unimpressed. And who exactly are you supposed to be? He didn't answer, not yet. He simply closed his notebook and slid it into his jacket pocket. His eyes were calm, but I could see the storm building there. Karen had just walked straight into a trap of her own making, and she didn't even know it yet. The air in the room shifted. The pine-scented breeze felt heavier now, charged with tension. Somewhere on the lake, a boat engine growled in the distance, a reminder that the world outside still went on as usual. But inside that cabin, something irreversible had begun, and Karen had no idea what was about to hit her. The silence after Karen's question was almost deafening. The Attorney General didn't need to raise his voice. His calm presence was louder than any shouting match. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket and set his badge on the table, right in the middle of her scattered threats. The gold emblem gleamed under the cabin's warm light, and for the first time, Karen's expression faltered. It lasted only a heartbeat. She quickly pasted on her usual smirk, pretending not to care, but I could see her throat tighten. That tiny flicker of recognition said it all. She knew exactly what the badge meant. Still, she kept talking. "This doesn't change anything," she said, her voice sharp and defensive. "HOA law is HOA law. You think you can just ignore your obligations." She pointed at me like I was a child caught drawing on the walls. "These fines are real. This lien is real. You can't just run off into the woods to avoid paying what you owe." The Attorney General didn't flinch. He let her dig herself deeper, his hands calmly folded behind his back. His notebook stayed closed, but I knew every word was being recorded somewhere. Karen was too angry to notice his phone's subtle glow on the table, its voice memo app running silently. I stood still, watching the scene unfold, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't just about me anymore. The state's top legal officer was standing in my living room, and Karen was charging at him like a bull in a china shop. He finally spoke, his voice measured and steady. "You're trespassing." Karen laughed, a short, brittle sound. "This whole cabin is in violation. We can inspect wherever we want. If you're hiding assets, we'll seize them." The words were absurd, but the way she said them made my blood run cold. This wasn't just bluster. She believed she had real power over property that wasn't even under her jurisdiction. The Attorney General gestured toward the door, calm as ever. "You have two options. You leave now, or I have you removed." But Karen wasn't used to being told no. She doubled down, stepping closer to the table, closer to him. "You don't scare me," she spat. "I've been running this HOA for 15 years. I've dealt with deadbeats, scammers, and people who thought they could cheat the system. You're not special. And neither is he." She jabbed her finger in my direction. Something shifted in the Attorney General's posture. Not anger, but resolve. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "Officer, come in," he said softly. The sound of boots on gravel followed almost immediately. I hadn't even realized his driver was also a security escort. But within seconds, a uniformed state officer stepped into the cabin. Karen whirled around, startled, and for the first time, she looked unsure of herself. "You're going to regret this," she hissed, her voice rising now. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" "I have contacts. I can call the county board. I can—" The officer didn't respond. He simply positioned himself between Karen and the Attorney General, standing solid as an oak. Karen's voice cracked with frustration. This is harassment. I'm the victim here. She grabbed her folder from the table and clutched it to her chest, as if the stack of bogus paperwork would somehow shield her. The Attorney General calmly retrieved his badge, slipped it back into his jacket, and turned to me. "Lock your door," he said. "We're not done." Then to Karen, "We'll be in touch." The officer guided her toward the door, firm but professional. She fought every step, spewing threats about lawsuits and police reports. When the door finally shut behind her, the entire cabin seemed to exhale. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of cicadas outside. I slumped into a chair, adrenaline draining from my body. "That woman is out of her mind," I muttered under my breath. But the Attorney General was already sorting through the papers she had left behind. "Out of her mind," he agreed, "and possibly out of legal ground to stand on." He held up one of her lean notices, his brow furrowed. "This isn't just intimidation. This is fraudulent. She's using the HOA's letterhead to threaten property she doesn't control. That's extortion." The weight of his words sank in. Extortion. Fraud. These weren't just petty HOA disputes anymore. This was a criminal investigation waiting to happen. We spent the next hour documenting everything. Every letter, every voicemail, every threat Karen had made in person. The Attorney General photographed the torn papers she left behind, his expression unreadable but intense. When we finished, he closed his folder with a snap. "We need to move fast. If she's bold enough to storm into your cabin while I'm sitting here, there's no telling what she's been doing to other homeowners." Outside, the officer waited by the SUV, scanning the tree line. The sun was dipping lower, painting the lake with streaks of orange and red. It should have been peaceful, but all I felt was a tightening grip of something bigger than I'd realized. As we walked to the door, I caught sight of Karen's tire tracks tearing through my gravel drive. They carved deep scars into the ground, a physical reminder of how far she was willing to go. The Attorney General glanced at them too, his jaw tightening. "We'll need to get statements from your neighbors," he said. "If she's been threatening you, she's been threatening them too." I nodded, though my stomach churned. I knew Karen wouldn't stop here. She'd be back, angrier and more reckless than before. And now, with the state's top lawman involved, she'd see this as all-out war. As the SUV pulled away with the Attorney General inside, I locked the cabin door and drew the curtains. For the first time since I'd moved to the lake, the woods felt less like a refuge and more like a target. And sure enough, just as darkness fell, headlights appeared on the distant road. A car slowed near the driveway, then disappeared into the night. Karen wasn't finished. She was just getting started. Karen stood frozen, her face pale, the room heavy with silence. The judge's words echoed. Motion denied. The lake is his private property. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. David didn't smile, didn't even glance at Karen. He simply gathered his papers, calm as ever, while Karen's attorney whispered frantically, knowing the case had collapsed. Outside, neighbors waited. Some offered handshakes. Others stayed quiet, guilt written on their faces. Karen stormed past without a word, sunglasses hiding eyes that burned with rage. David looked at the crowd and said only one thing. "I told you, I was swimming in my own lake." Then he walked away, the man who stood alone and won. But as he left, Karen's phone buzzed. Her whispered words were chilling. "It's not over. We'll find another way." The battle for the lake was finished, but the war for control of the neighborhood had just begun.